Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you again this morning.
Morning, good to see you.
Yeah, today we're going to proceed to and continue our conversation about the wonderful revelation that is, man, being a parent is stressful. Who would have known,
Shocked. I could have had a V8, I
right?
mean, it's just, yeah, there was this article, essay in the New York Times by the Surgeon General, and it was about how parenting is a stressful undertaking. And we talked about it earlier in an earlier podcast. And the point that he makes in the article is that parenting today is parenting has always been stressful.
Right.
Everybody will tell you that. I mean, I could talk to my grandmother and she would say, yeah, it was hard raising kids. It was wonderful, but hard. Um, but today, the challenges are larger, they're more significant, there are more demands, and parenting today is far more stressful than it's ever been.
Right.
Combination of factors, of course, but it's far more stressful. And the point is that what Murty is talking about as a Surgeon General, and he certainly has, I can remember when pediatricians were told by the National Rifle Association to stay in their lane.
Mm.
And Surgeon General is very much in his lane when he raises the question, should we think about parenting as a public health issue
Right.
because of the amount of stress that it creates?
Right. Yeah, and we made that point in the last podcast, and I think that it's pretty clear that it is. When we think about the chronic effects of long-term stress, and
Right. Mhm.
we try to address issues that cause the stress, whether it's medical, physical health issues, mental health issues, or in this case, parenting, something that we voluntarily do, but
Mhm.
yet, contributes to in significant ways to our stress. And so, um, in response to, as you said, the Surgeon General's essay came out in late
Late August. Yeah.
August.
Mhm.
There's been some responses to that, and there was a response recently by Daniel Device, who writes about personal finance in U.S. Today,
You're
and
right.
he wrote an essay entitled "Surgeon General's Warning: Parenting may be hazardous to your health."
Right.
That'll get your attention.
Like cigarette smoking might be hazardous to your health, and eating rancid meat might be, yeah, it might be hazardous to your health. He covers personal finance for USA Today, so he sort of takes a kind of a financial, economic, data-driven approach to this. He responded in that way, and he begins by with a quote from Gretchen Salyer.
Mhm.
She's the founder of June Care. June Care is an organization that connects families with childcare because we know childcare is in short supply. And she said, if parents can't function, and remember in an earlier podcast, we said almost 50% of parents are completely overwhelmed by parenting and can't function. She said, if parents can't function, how can we expect our youth mental health crisis to get any better?
Right.
She's referring to the current mental health crisis that has been in the news and in other publications for a couple of years now. That we have this youth mental health crisis, and she said, if parents are supposed to be, how can they deal with that if they're so stressed that they can't function? What we're saying is, it's not. We agree with her. At the same time, we're saying it's not just youth mental health that we're concerned about. When this kind of stress emerges, we're talking about all of our functional abilities could decline. They all could be compromised.
Absolutely. And, it's so interesting when you think about and think about how it ties together with, you think about all the stress and difficulty with functioning that parents are having. And
Mhm.
then you sort of overlay that with some of the challenges that we're talking about with kids when we talk about the youth mental health crisis and the significant increase in stress and anxiety that they're experiencing.
Right.
Is there really wonder that when parents are in distress,
Hmm.
their kids are going to be in distress. I mean,
Right.
you
Mhm.
can't tease those apart because they are intricately tied together.
Mhm.
And as one declines in functioning, the other is going to decline in functioning almost automatically, simply because they're dependent on each other. It's a mutual contribution.
Right. If parents are in charge of the household, if they're in charge of the guidance and the structure and the scheduling and the support and the scaffolding the kids needs, if they're so stressed that they can't function, well, here's this house. I mean, think about this house in chaos. I mean, how do you do anything? And anybody who's in that house is going to be adversely affected by
Right,
parenting stress. And
right.
so this goes way beyond just mental health to all aspects of a child's life, emotional development, education, goal set, all that is going to be affected by increases in parental stress. What this author does is he lists what he considers are the major stressors, and he lists in his article he listed four of the problems or challenges confronting today's parents.
Right.
And the first of these is the rising cost of childcare. Um, During the pandemic, kids were sent home, and the problem for childcare was that many of those childcare places closed. And so with fewer places to go, of course, you have supply and demand. So costs have gone up. So the first problem he cites is rising childcare costs.
Yeah, and it's oftentimes things that we don't necessarily even think about when it
Mhm.
comes to childcare costs. Let's put aside the whole thing with, how much it costs to feed and clothe and shelter kids. But you think about even things related to with school and
Mhm.
that kind of things that, again, we're not going to put everything on the pandemic and all, but
Right.
prior
Mhm.
to the pandemic, there were many schools that provided childcare before and after school.
Right.
Then the pandemic hit and a lot of that stopped. And then we all start going back to school and everything. And there were many schools that didn't resume childcare.
Right.
So
Right.
now you have to get your child to school no earlier than 30 minutes before the school day starts.
Right.
Have to pick them up no later than 30 minutes after the school day ends. And if
Right.
you're a parent that works, some of these schools don't have transportation to other places.
Mhm.
And so you have to do something to 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 care for and to get your kids transported to and fro to different places
Right.
and pay for the cost of those. And those costs keep increasing. It costs more to put your child in after school care. It costs more to put them in, when they're younger, to put them in all day daycare.
Right. Yeah.
And as those costs increase,
Mhm.
obviously, Richard, how many parents do you know who say it would cost me more to work than it does to not work?
That's right. That's exactly what we're facing today. I mean, these figures, and some of these are from California, but it doesn't matter because it's all relative. $325 a week is the average. That's 18 to 25% of a person's income for
Right,
many people. Okay. In Sacramento, the cost is $3,000 a month. Now, that's 3,000 that you write a check for. So to pay 3,000, you have to make about $3,600 or almost $4,000 a month. You'd have to take home about $4,000 a month to write a $3,000 check,
right,
right? And so what that does is it puts a working parent in the position of, am I just working to pay childcare?
right.
In
Yeah.
many places you would be. I mean, how many people have a take home pay of $4,000? Teachers don't have
Right.
that. I
And
mean,
that oftentimes is just one child.
That's for one.
If you
That's right.
have multiple children,
There's no way. I mean, you'd have to make $10,000 a month to put two kids in daycare in Sacramento. Okay.
right. So you have parents who literally say, I can't work because if I work, the amount that it costs me to put my kids in childcare
Right.
exceeds what I'm going to make. And so in the very least, it balances out. And
Right.
so why work when all of that is just going to childcare and I could just stay home with my kids. And it makes sense that people would make those decisions.
Right. That's right. So, and now you're talking about a career-ending decision
Right.
because if you're at mid-career and you have to take years off to do childcare, your career essentially that career has now stalled or ended. Okay. And so that's the terrible decision that many parents are making. And when you talk about contributors to stress, that's a practical decision that most parents are facing today.
Absolutely. Now, the second point that he makes is that parents have more demands on their time.
Right.
And again, we have emphasized this a number of times that there's a significant increase in the number of hours that people are spending at work, um,
Right.
and of course, a significant number of hours that parents are spending with directly caring for their kids.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, and when you put these all together, it is astronomical to think about how much more time is demanded from being from this parental role.
Hmm. Yeah, because I mean, we don't want to overwhelm you with numbers, but compared to 1985, which is not that long ago, I mean, certainly within this generation, compared to 1985, we're spending, we've gone from about 50 hours a week to 60 hours a week that we're spending. And if you combine the two. And so parents are spending far more hours at work
Mhm.
than they did in 1985. So and that's a huge difference. I mean, it's almost a work day. It's
Right.
almost another day of work. I talked to a guy the other day. He has a regular job at a well-known company, and he said, I work about 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
That's that's not unusual. And you're not
Right.
getting paid for 50 hours, but if you have you're working for 50, 60 hours a week, and
Right.
that's become the norm today.
Right.
I mean,
Eh,
you're expecting,
Oftentimes, how often do we almost wear it as a badge? I was joking with my wife on the way home from work
right.
yesterday. I was here in the office for about 12 hours yesterday.
Absolutely.
And I was back here less than 10 hours later,
Right. That's right. We do it routinely. Right.
routinely.
Right. And so everybody who's working is spending more time at work.
Hmm.
Second, we're spending more time with our kids.
Hmm.
Um, we were laughing about this in an earlier podcast. Our parents didn't spend a lot of time with us. I
Right.
mean, they were home, but they weren't with us. They weren't doing things with us. We were out playing. We kind of raised ourselves. But today, parents are much more involved with their children, going to practices, going to games, going to activities, playing with them, nurturing them, doing things with them. It just comes with the territory today that
Yeah.
parents just spend more time with their kids.
Yeah.
So the first problem is the expense of childcare. The second stressor is we're just spending more time doing everything. So we have less time for relaxation and fun.
Right.
Okay. Third
Right.
thing is technology.
Right. And we don't even have to spend a lot of time on this one because
No.
we've
Mm.
talked about this one many times in the podcast. But
Right.
my goodness, the role and influence of technology and social media in
Mhm.
general is just immeasurable because the whole effect of what we scroll through Facebook and we see how wonderful everybody else's lives are. And you see their lives really aren't that wonderful, but
Mhm.
they curate and they make sure that they post only photos that make things look wonderful.
Right.
Um, and but yet we compare ourselves to that, and so again, significantly increasing stress and
Yeah.
frustration and all of that.
That's right. We didn't have to deal with that until the mid 2000s, right?
Right, right.
And then there's the high cost of children, just the cost of children. And because in our country, and this is not true in every country, but and I don't mean it as a criticism, it's just the way things are. In our country, you're on your own if you're a parent. I mean, the financial responsibilities, managing your life, managing your children, that's really your business. In a way, it should be your business. But on the other hand, what's happening is children have become so expensive that many parents will tell you I didn't have my children until I was in my 30s because I didn't feel that I could afford it. I had to build up my cash reserves. I had to build up a bank account so that I could have children.
Right.
Now, that's not always been the case, and that's not the case in many countries today. But in today's world, in our country today, many people are saying, well, I have to get myself on a firm financial footing before I can even have children. And that, and I don't want to say too much about that, except that it's this financial burden that's determining your
Right.
decision to have children and your child rearing practices.
Right.
And
And so we look at some other statistics that there are some people that are concerned about the rate of population growth.
yeah, right.
In some places we have this significant, increase in the population, and in
Mhm.
other areas it's either level. People are babies are born as about as fast as people are dying, and it balances out. And then there are places where there's a deficit, where more people are passing than there are people being born, and this is a big concern for some cultures and some areas. And this is exactly why, because people are realizing, many women are realizing that, my goodness, if I want to have a career, I can't have kids right now. I have to wait to have kids. And
Right,
sometimes when you wait to have kids, you have more difficulty having kids. And so
right.
there's not as many babies being born. And, the longer you wait, the fewer kids you're going to have. If you start having kids at 18, the likelihood of you having 3 or 4 kids is significantly higher than if you have your first child at 35.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
so, so this has become, again, when you think about public policy and public health, this is another reason why it's such a concern.
That's right. Because once you acknowledge, and I think that's what these articles do, once you acknowledge that stress is a problem, then the question becomes, what can policymakers do to help stressed out parents? I mean, so you begin by saying, yeah, I see the point that stress is a problem. What can we do? And those are the questions that have to be asked.
Right. And
We
so there's
posted
a
the
second
second,
article.
yeah,
Yeah.
the second article by Carol Miller. And she's a journalist, I think, with the New York Times. And her title of hers is Today's Parents, Exhausted, Burned Out, and Perpetually Behind. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you ask the same question. Why is this? Why are we talking about this as a public health crisis from the Surgeon General? And she says once again that today's parents are facing very different and more demanding challenges than ever before, and that we're spending more time and more money. And this is I see this playing out in our community, and I'm sure it's everywhere. We spend more time and more money educating and enriching our children because parents have this nagging feeling that if they don't give their child every possible advantage, that their children will be unable to succeed in this type of economy.
And I think that's such an interesting perspective, because as I thought about that, I was thinking, we think back to, we compare this to when we were growing up, right?
Sure.
Um, I don't know that, our parents have always wanted their kids to do better than they did, right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay, their parents set the bar here and they want their kids to just exceed that. Um, but my perspective was always, when I was growing up, that was my responsibility. You know what I mean? It's like, um, I expect you to do more, but you're going to have to work. I'm going to, the parents, of course, they did what they could, they provided what they could, but it was like, you got to go and do that. Now it's almost like we live in a culture right now where the parents see it as their responsibility to ensure that this is going to happen. I don't know that my parents felt like it was their job to ensure that it was going to happen.
That's right. No, when you monitor their assignments, you monitor their homework, you monitor their school attendance, You make sure that they're to school on time. You make sure that they're getting their homework done. You get them to practice. You get them to coaches. You put them in the activities. And this constant, unending pressure to succeed and succeed and succeed. And there's now a word for that. It's called intensive parenting.
Another parenting type.
Right. You and I have barely scratched the surface with gentle parenting. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wilkinson just shook his head in disgust when I mentioned gentle parenting. This is intensive parenting, and we see it all the time. We see parents taking their kids, this whole travel ball thing where kids are at practice 3 and 4 nights a week, and then every weekend they're at a tournament. And it consumes building these children, nurturing these children becomes an all-consuming passion for many families. This painstaking, methodical cultivation of our children is called intensive parenting. And so we mentioned earlier that parents are spending more time at work, but they're also spending more time with their kids. Intensive parenting is how we're doing that. We're spending in large amounts of time and money investing in our children so that they can succeed in this culture.
Yeah, and it's funny because we've talked before about how dangerous it is for parents to tell kids that school is their job. That's their only job, is to do well at school. Well, I think that we might need to start giving, especially these parents, these intensive parents, give them the same warning that there's a problem with saying that parenting is your only job. Um,
Right.
because you
Yeah.
do have other things that you have to do. But my goodness, some of these parents, their entire existence is centered around making sure that their kids are at the top of everything, whether
Hmm.
the kid really wants to be or not.
Right.
They work to
Mhm.
make sure that their kid is at the top. And you're chasing, as Dr. Murthy says, was quoted in this article, chasing unreasonable expectations has left many families feeling exhausted, burned out, and perpetually behind.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's exactly what it does. It
Mhm.
makes people feel as though they just can't keep up.
Right. Yep. And how did we get here? Well, we got here because we know that early childhood experiences help kids develop later on. We learned that many years ago. College admissions have it's become a blood sport. I mean, my goodness, even
Yeah.
in Florida, where my child has to go to this university. Well, that university, you need a 4.5 grade point average and 1,300 on and so parents are in this frenzy to get their children into that university.
Right.
Social media, the comparison frenzy that we have in social media. Um, and then we have no faith in that we're going to have any support. So many parents feel that they have to do this on their own because they're not going to have any support from institutions, whether it's schools or the government, or you don't have much help. Okay.
Right.
Parenting in America might be a unique activity compared to other countries.
Mhm.
Uh, in our culture, parenting is an individual task. In many cultures, it's a societal task. It's the whole culture raises the children. Here in our country, you're kind of on your own. Parenting is very lonely because of that. And we don't have a lot of family friendly policies. You don't have much support. Our government has left us alone.
Mhm.
This rugged individualism, you raise your own children. And 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 that's how we have developed our parenting style, is that you're kind of on your own, and we don't have a lot of family friendly policies in our government, and the ones that we have are sort of riddled with holes and loopholes, and they're very hard to access and very hard to get.
Right. Well, and let's be honest that that's what many people say that they want until they don't. And it's sort of this dichotomy between nobody should tell me how to raise my kids,
Right.
but then
Mhm.
kids go to school and parents will say, well, that's the school's responsibility to teach them this and that,
Hmm.
but don't tell, but you can only do so much in 7.5 hours a day. So, but
Right,
don't tell me what to do at home. And it's
right,
like, you can't, you can't have both. You can't say that that you're going to, nobody else can tell you what to do with your kids and how to raise your kids, but then at the same time say, but it's the school's responsibility to make sure that they're ready for college and they're ready for all these other things. Both those things can't happen necessarily at the same time.
that's right. So in our country, yes, parents have control, but they don't have a lot of support systems. The
Right.
support systems aren't funded. We talked about children with special needs who are at a unique disadvantage. Okay. And so in the past, one of the ways this is playing itself out is in the past half century, since the 70s and early 80s, women have had many new opportunities. They've entered the workforce. They've
Oh,
gained financial independence. They can buy things now that they couldn't before. They couldn't buy their own car. Now they can get financing, they can buy things. But now, at the same time, we have an economy, not the economy this year, but the economy in the past 50 years,
right,
regardless of who was in office, doesn't have any party affiliation. Both parents have to work.
right,
Okay. And that's the difference. You need two incomes to do the things that you want to do. There was a time when one income was enough.
right.
I grew up in that world where men went to work and women stayed home, and you had a house and you had cars and you went to college and you could do everything you wanted to do on one income. You can't do that today. Very few people can do that on one income. You need two incomes. So we say on the one hand, we want women to work, we want women to be in the workplace. But what do you do with the children? And
Right.
if because you need to have childcare and child-friendly policies. So the increased demands of raising children combined with the responsibilities and the lack of work, and so you have more time with your kids, more responsibilities, leads to increased stress. And we're doing all of this, more work, less support. We're doing it at the expense of our mental health, our
Mhm.
leisure time, sleep, and time alone with your spouse. I mean,
Yeah.
we're on this sort of hamster wheel of child rearing with little support from the outside, and it's at the expense of all the things you need to be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And in no way are we suggesting that we should reverse time and go back to a time when women didn't work, because women should be working and women should be able to
They should be allowed to
follow
work.
their passions and have careers that they want to have. What
Mhm.
we're saying is that, the changes that need to be made are more cultural, are broader. Looking at this as a societal problem, raising good kids, if we think about our jobs as parents is just to raise decent human beings, if we put it down to that fundamental of a level,
Right,
that should be a societal goal. That should be a societal thing. Like, I want my kids to grow up and be decent human beings, but I want your kids to grow up and be decent human beings too, because they're going to be living with my kids.
right. That's right. They're going to be going to school with my children.
Right. There's not these are good kids school and these are bad kids. We don't want that. We want to, because once they get out of school, they're going to be in society. They're going to go to the same stores that we all go to. They're going to go to the same ballparks. They're going to be in the same communities that we all live in. So we want everyone to be decent human beings. So that's a
Right.
that's a social, that's a societal thing.
That's right. You are responsible for yourself. There's an individual responsibility to be the best that you can be. But we also have a social contract,
Right.
and we can argue a lot about that, but we do have a social contract. We are in this together, and we do need to work together to be the best culture that we can be, not for some people, but for all people. That's what I liked about the public schools as they existed many years ago, where you had everybody in one, there were all kinds of kids in one classroom, and you learned how to get along with everybody. And that's, we're losing that
Right.
today. Okay. So there is a social responsibility here that I think we have. And I think that's kind of what these people are talking about, is that, yes, it's our job to do it right, but there is a social responsibility that there should be these supports in place to help us get to where we want to be as a culture.
Right. And so if we all held that perspective, that, the
Right.
perspective that our goal is to, help all kids, become decent human beings, sticking with
Mhm.
that, you know, it would help address some of the issue. One of the main issues is inequality.
Right.
There are things
Yeah.
that there are services and supports that some families have access to that most other families don't have access to. This just
Bernie,
it
I
what
was
it is.
shocked when I came. Oh no, when I had my first son, when we played sports, whether we played in a community place or a high school, we brought our own shoes and our own glove. Everything else was provided.
Right,
I mean, bats and balls and the catcher's equipment. Today, you need to buy all that stuff.
right,
And parents are buying their children catcher's gear for Little League or, hundreds of dollars. Baseball bats cost $300.
right,
Okay. Cheerleading, thousands of dollars if you want your children to be a cheerleader in uniforms and travel and everything. Well, who has that? Not everybody has that kind of money. If
right,
you do, if you have the time to do all of that traveling, if you have the car to do all that traveling, you can afford the equipment and the uniforms and the lessons and the tutors and the private coaches. All of this is doable.
right,
Your kids can participate. But most of us don't have that. Most people don't have those kinds of resources. So if you have it, you have an enormous advantage that you can pass on to your children. Your children get to do that, but most children don't. When I was in school, participation wasn't a financial consideration.
yeah,
Everybody could participate because the school provided all the uniforms and the equipment.
right.
Today,
It's different. It's very different. And so yes, when we look at parenting, I guess the ultimate conclusion that we're trying to draw here is that, parenting is difficult. Parenting is stressful. But part of that is because, in large part, it's because we are taking it all on individually. And if we worked more societally, if we worked more
Mhm.
in together to take care of some of these issues, if we sort of backed off on the intensive parenting, and we allowed um, kids to do what kids do, and avoided all of these additional stressors that we keep adding on ourselves.
Right.
We could alleviate some of that stress, and not that it would make parenting that much easier, but it would make things more manageable, and it wouldn't affect so many other areas of our lives.
Right. Yeah. I think that many parents can take your foot off the gas.
Mhm.
Okay. And you don't have to bring the vehicle to a stop, but take your foot off the gas. Stop pushing everything so hard. Your kids are going to do well.
Right.
And it's almost not going to matter what all this other stuff that you're doing. They're going to become what they're going to become. And we don't have near the control or influence that we think we have. So it's okay. Just ease up a little bit on the intensive parenting. On the other hand, I would hope that public policy would change so that we say we want you parents to do the best job you can, and we're going to provide you with some supports to make sure that you can. Okay, and that would be a good balance between this is your individual responsibility, but you're going to have the assistance through childcare or insurance programs or adequate food programs. We're going to give you what you need to do a good job, and
Right.
that's a chance. In our country today, we have a very, very passionate pro-life movement. And it would be nice to see a pro-family movement or a pro-child movement with that same kind of passion and
Right.
intensity.
A-
Don't
a-
you have to do away with one, but let's bring that same passion to the other needs that we have that we're beginning to identify.
Absolutely. All right, that is it for today. We're going to certainly talk more about parenting um, as we go, because just this discussion brings up a lot of other topics that we really need to talk about. But that's it for today. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy. and forget to be afraid.